بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا افتح لنا أبواب رحمتك ونعوذ بك من الحسد ومن العين ومن سوء الظن ومن الرياء ومن الذنوب. فأنت الغفار أنت الغفور، فنعتمد عليك ونتوجه إليك ولا أحد نعبد إلا أنت. We wanted to begin this reflection with some principles in the Quran that we find were extremely fundamental in the understanding of the companions. We find in the Quran that there are a number of imperative statements, meaning commands, whether it's اعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا, or whether it is لا تنازعوا فتفشلوا وتذهب ريحكم, or whether it's أمروا بينهم شورى, or whether it's the whole concept of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, the idea of the jama'ah. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala created the world and revealed the Quran.
Red light camera recorded ahead.
So in the dimension of revelation, or in the dimension of creation, meaning in our interactions in the dunya with each other and in the reality of the context that we live in, we're going to find that there are a number of laws that manifest themselves, laws of success. And that's the same thing that we find in the Quran. We find the sunan of the Sharia, and we find the sunan that are called kawniyya, or universal rules, or cosmic rules, or constants that govern social behavior, that they operate in the universe. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala commanded a holding on to the habl of Allah. And I had mentioned this before in another place, but I think that given this administrative year, I like to call these years administrative years, like accounting years, because we follow the Hijri calendar. But it's a fact that in the society, it's a new year. It's an administrative year. Like, last year went out, a new year comes in. Take account of certain things. And so, for instance, one of the things that I left off with was the reflection on the Quran, how the Quran tells us to hold on to the habl, or the rope of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And so the habl of Allah, it has a number of different meanings. Even though it's translated as rope, it can mean the Quran, it can mean the jama'ah, it can mean iman. All of those things are sufficient in order to give us an understanding of what it is that's being talked about in the Quran itself. So the Quran is commanding us to hold on to the rope together, hold on to iman together, hold on to the Quran together, hold on to each other in the jama'ah. And then you find in another place in the Quran, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala prohibits, لا تنازعوا. Like, don't get into the types of dispute where it materializes into some sort of conflict, or has that potential, because the consequence of that is al-fashl, failure. And how that failure comes about is تذهب ريحكم, that that your ability, قدرة التنفيذ, or your capacity to be able to be effective and effectuate and implement anything in the world, it becomes extremely difficult, right? And you lose your power, so to speak. And so there, in addition to the whole idea of the Quran commanding us to the brotherhood of Islam and so on and so forth, but fundamentally, those are principles in Dawah that are not implemented. And this is why there is a lot of
red light camera reported ahead.
Lost potential. There's a lot of lost potential that we encounter. Aside from the issue of lack of vision and lack of understanding of how to deal with people, but there's this other reality. The other reality is, that we're not in formation. The formation process, we could say, is twofold. Formation is the process by which we are built up to be able to be in a position. It's not just an issue of knowledge. It's not just an issue of information, but it's an issue of understanding and implementation. And that takes experience, right? And so it's like there has to be a process in which, we have to have an understanding that leadership is not just about, sorry about that. So it's not just the issue of leadership and that is predicated on information and degrees and ijazat and titles and grabbing the power and being in a position. It doesn't work like that.
Turn right.
It doesn't work like that we're going to have success in that regard. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were formed into their positions, and they had the ability to work together
right.
and establish shura with each other, and then that shura had the power of implementation behind, yani qudrat al-tanfidh or ta'thir, yani it had athar, from the angle that
in 0.1 miles.
The issue of the shura being implemented, it effectuated something. It brought a reality forth. That's what comes when we agree to something and we implement it, power. And this is a fundamental problem that we have, is that, we agree to things and we fail to follow through. We come together and then we divide. We conversate and communicate. We argue to the point where it collapses our ability to be effective. Unfortunately, the Muslim community as of yet hasn't matured to the point of really understanding what leadership is, right? And this is factual. We're still trying to understand what leadership is, and you have everybody's playing the test of testing the leadership concept, in different capacities, whether it's those who study and then all of a sudden they become interested in being imams, or they become operational in the community, or whether it's those who are on boards or they take leadership positions in this institution or that institution. You find that people are testing these different areas, but very few people have been prepared to be in these positions. Very few people have been properly prepared to take these positions in a very functional way, right? That's just not the case. And so this is one of the things that's lacking in the Muslim community. The issue of formation is the issue of acknowledging that knowledge is not enough. And you find this even in the corporate world, where you can have a degree, but then you come into a particular system and you have to be trained into that system to really be effective. And so sometimes you may be operating outside of your realm. In other words, you have to gain new skill sets. And there's nothing to say that within the context of the deen, that doesn't apply as well. We have this consideration or this idea that anybody can just go and talk about Islam, that anybody can just go lead in the Dawah, that anybody can go and take these positions. And unfortunately, we right now are the only religious orientation that has that mindset. And it's not really Islamic. It's really more close to some of the fringe Christian groups. The some of the Bible Belt groups, they function in that mindset that I'm inspired to do this, and I just do it, and I can learn the word and the route as I go along. So the issue of formation becomes key. In other words, we have to admit that there's some learning that has to go into really understanding how to carry out the whole concept of being a leader in Islam. Right? That's something that's extremely important. And the other issue is that it's not just an issue of grabbing experience. Right? It's not just the issue of grabbing experience. There's another issue involved here. The other issue is what? The other issue is learning how to deal with other people. Learning how to come to decisions in a solid way in which you have agreements and you follow through on those agreements. Right? That's why, I quoted the prohibition. لا تنازعوا فتفشلوا وتذهب ريحكم. Right? The Quran is telling us what is the law of regression. Right? The law of regression is where your hearts are brought together in Iman, but you have no capacity to come together in being able to be effective in achieving anything. And so the regression is that the lesson of Iman, which comes back to the issue of brotherhood and unity, it could be functional unity. We find that Iman in the Quran is tied into brotherhood. Whether it's in Surah Al-Fatiha or whether it's in Surah Al-Hujurat, we find the whole concept that Iman and brotherhood are tied together. Just like Iman and the Ummah are tied together. The communal reality. But that communal reality, it won't manifest itself. It won't be something that is lived out, embodied, if you don't have an actual process by which you come to agree. And so then the Quran gives us some rules. So, don't fall into discontent and conflict with each other, because the consequence of that is failure, and you will not have the ability to achieve much. And this is what we find. We're not priding ourselves. The Shaykh Walid al-Manisi is attributed to him that he said that the sunnah of growth in the Muslim community in the US is conflict. That what you find is that masajid emerge in the community not from a community-based master plan with a vision for the future, but because somebody in the masjid in one community that's built, they disagree, they fall out, and then they end up going to form their own community. And so then you find the examples that I can give you, like a recent example with regard to some masajid and what happened in a particular state, not the state that I'm living in, just to be clear. That when I inquired about the state that I'm very familiar with, I was told that, people are doing okay. Right now, people are struggling a little bit because they just built a new $5 million masjid. And so that pulled the funds out of the rest of the community. So rather than having the spirit of ta'awunu ala al-birri wa taqwa wa la ta'awunu ala al-ithmi wal-udwan, we end up not having that spirit of cooperation and collaboration and that which is good, so that we have the ability to be effective, but we end up cooperating with each other in, animosity and enmity, right? And the whole issue of, competing in today's time, يتطاولون في البنيان, that it becomes an issue of competing with each other and building tall buildings or edifices. And that's the nature of the dunya. If you go, mostly every country now on the face of the earth is engaged in some sort of expansion project. And then you have, countries that are creating their own islands, and so you have that in Nigeria, you have that in Egypt, you have that in Dubai, you have that all over the place now, and it's just like the people are starving. In Malaysia, there's people are starving to death, and you have billions being dropped on projects of competition. And so, and so then the issue comes back, and I want to end on this note. The issue comes back to not being effective and being able to solve any of the world's issues or problems, right? And so then when you bring that back to the issue of the ummah, we're not effective at being able to solve our own problems because, again, the formation of proper leadership is not there. People, if a person thinks that leadership is something that you're just born with, then you don't have an understanding of what leadership is. Even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was a prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, the Quran was revealed gradually. And one of the reasons why the Quran was revealed gradually, it was for the digestibility of the message and the implementability, so that the message can be understood, it can be comprehended, it can be practiced. And so in the beginning of the Dawah, you find that only a few ayat of the Quran were revealed, and then there was a break in revelation. And so when you look at the ulama of tafsir, they say that the break that took place in revelation was to get the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam accustomed to this new reality that was before him, right? Which is being spoken to from the unseen, which will scare anyone. And so before coming to Surah Al-Muzammil and Surah Al-Mudaththir, there was this weightiness that the Prophet ﷺ had. There was part fear, there was things that he went through because of his exposure to this new reality of prophethood. And then, so it took a little bit of time from Surah Al-Alaq or Iqra. By the time you get to Mudaththir and Muzammil, in that area right there, it took a little bit of time before the Prophet ﷺ coming into that modality of what? The modality of, now I have the responsibility to communicate the teachings of Islam. It took time to be molded into that. And so the Quran, it came gradually, and we find the same thing with the Sahaba. And so it wasn't just an issue of just take this information and memorize it, know it, and that's it. Islamic education is a lot different than, a class that you take for a certificate. The difficulty with Islamic education and the weightiness of it is that it's demanding some sort of personal self-transformation. And so there's the issue of having integrity with the knowledge, which is not easy to have. It means having the knowledge and understanding it and putting it into practice. And so that's not easy to achieve, especially we're fighting with our nafs, our desires. And so I want to close, I said I was going to close. I want to close with that idea that, we're not doing this properly. And, may take some people to come to this understanding, may take them a little while, but we're not doing this properly. And the evidence that we're not doing this properly is that we don't have solid leadership. There's maybe some leadership that's there, but anybody wearing the leadership cap or claiming to be the leader is not always the leader. When we look at the formation and the development of the community, is growth and its health and all of that, those really are indicators as to where the community is at with regard to leadership. I'll give you one example, and I'll definitely close with this. The amount of cases, and this is one of the reasons also why I took a break. It was almost 2 months I came on very infrequently on Facebook, but because I wanted to just get a different perspective on things, and just also take a break from certain things. But the amount of cases of family issues that are in the community, family issues involve also people trying to get married. Family issues, it involves people trying to get married. It involves people maintaining marriages. It involves people working through divorce. It involves post-divorce period, people trying to raise kids. The failure on that front is something that no one wants to take responsibility. Okay? If I were to have a problem as a Catholic in my marriage, I would go to my church, talk to a priest. The priest will have counseling sessions with me, and there's some sort of system in place overall for how we're going to deal with the issues. First of all, there's also marital training before you go in that you're encouraged to have. There's also other issues that are addressed, such as your spiritual life, and where you at in your relationship, and there's other programs. I don't want to get into that, but you have some masajid that have openly opted to just say, we're not going to deal with any problems in the community. If I were to sit here and say, well, damn it, everybody will say, oh my God, like, look at the way that this brother talks. But it becomes like, well, damn it, you took the zakat money from the community. You took the sadaqah money from the community, right? You get on the minbar on a weekly basis, whether it's the president of the masjid or whether it's the designated imam. But then when it comes to solving the issues of the community, you don't want to deal with the issues of the community. You just want to deal with the part of the leadership, which gives you the title and where you can vocalize everything. But when it comes to actually solving the problems of the community, you don't want to be there. And that's how Dawah has become, right? And so that's just an example of where we're failing on multiple fronts. And see, the consequences of that is major, or are major. The consequences of not addressing these types of things with thoroughness is that you're talking about the future of the ummah from multiple angles. From the angle that the ummah cannot exist properly, right? I don't want to get into the technical definition. Well, you could be an ummah on your own. Ibrahim was an ummah, alayhi salatu wasalam. I don't want to get into that type of discussion. Talk about ummah from the idea of how we understand ummah, right? From the angle of the ummah being the followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, dealing with people. You're not dealing with the individual, but dealing with people. So that ummah is not constructed without families, right? And the continuity of Islam, as you find in Surah Al-Kahf, we follow cause and effect. And so, there's a causal rule here. And part of the causal rule that we want to bring to attention, we want to bring this causal rules to attention, is the issue of what? Is the issue that it relates to where we should be at in the Dawah. And so what is that rule? The rule is that you can't have an ummah without strong families. And you can't have the development of strong Muslim youth or children without having healthy families. And so the maintaining also of people's sexuality, their sanity, their emotional health, that has to do with solid relationships. Not people, becoming suicidal because their relationships suck, which is, by the way, something that is very frequent that we find. Not people feeling that they need to cheat or go into polygamy as a solution for the fact that they're not functioning in their marriage. There's a number of different scenarios that we can play out here. Not people thinking that, pornography becomes the solution. This is where we start having some real deep issues. Like, we have to start looking at ourselves like, what is really the state of Muslim marriage, in this time period? And and the importance of maintaining Muslim marriage, and and how that pertains to the community, how that pertains to individual practice, how that pertains to the future of the ummah, how that pertains to children. Again, if you have children that are growing up in messed up marriages, then they grow up to produce messed up marriages unless there's somebody that intervenes. The masjid should do the work. And so that's just an example of where leadership is failing. That's just one example. Educating people in the deen. You know what I'm saying? People say, oh, well, the masjid shouldn't be everything. Well, the masjid, if we want to talk about sunnah, the masjid was the center of everything for the Muslims in the past. But in any event, I went further than I wanted to go, but I just wanted to drop that example to talk about how we're not properly formed to really function in the dawah on multiple levels, right? And the dawah means here communicating of Islam, the education of Islam, the maintaining of Islam, the supporting of Islam, the building for Islam, and the protection of Islam, continuity of Islam. It involves our survival, our growth, our development. And so that, in order to be that at that level, we're going to have to look at how to develop ourselves. Even if we studied, there's studying by itself is not going to do it. Even if we have experience, it's not going to do it, because we have a lack of unity. We have a lack of unity that makes us ineffective. We have a lack of unity that makes us ineffective, and we have a lack of authority as well. A lack of authority and power. So you find, imams and mashaykh and all that really don't mean anything in the community, right? Even the president of the masjid, for as much as people want to fight for those types of titles, or the director of this or that, at the end of the day, what can you do, homie? I want to see what you can do to solve the problems of the community with that title. If you can't make something move with the title, be effective and make something happen, then it goes back to my point. It's like, the lack of effectiveness in the dawah is coming back to not knowing how to use these positions to really grow the community. And so I end on that note. These are some fundamentals that we want to keep for the rest of the year, so to speak, in mind, that is important for us to rethink the whole concept of leadership in the Muslim community, its purposes and so on and so forth, its aims, objectives, its qualifications, its requirements, how to develop leadership. And then especially, we have to think about the whole idea of dawah and how that works out, and the whole issue of our survival, and our growth. Those things that people are confronting right now as challenges. Some communities are confronting survival issues. You look at Yemen. You look at some indigenous communities here in the U.S. I'm just now keeping it to the Muslim community. And so I say that to say that it's serious. Even we have to look at ourselves. What is the state of our health, our iman, our productivity, our growth, where are we at in all of that? What I'm saying? Some people, they think that growth and productivity is just collecting, degrees and money and this and that. But we're talking about where are we at with regard to really building the ummah. Somebody collecting a degree, if it's not actually properly being used for the building of the ummah, that it's not going to help us. Whatever that degree is in. But in any event, we leave off on that note. Serious stuff. Assalamu alaikum.